And we're recording. Good morning. We are now at around 6:37 a.m. in Atlanta, Georgia, and 12:36 p.m. here in Norway. We're here with Dr. Jasmine Younge. She is the current executive director of the Georgia NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And she's the first in 20 years, in almost 20 years, to have this position. She's dedicated to the field of education and international affairs. She has served on faculty on several universities within a political science discipline since 2007. She currently serves on faculty at Kennesaw State University within the School of Government and International Affairs. She has also been a Rotary ambassador to Brazil, and that's how we met because I was living there at the time. Among many other stellar accomplishments, Dr. Young holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and health information management from Alabama State University, an MBA degree from Delaware State University, and Doctor of Philosophy degree in political science and international affairs from Clark Atlanta University. So, Dr. Young, what I have to ask you today, and I am so glad that we're doing this, and I only wish it wasn't under such sad circumstances. About a month ago, during a class, we were playing on Kahoot. We're doing an activity where we were supposed to pick our names, and then people would play a game with vocabulary and grammar and all of that. And somebody thought it was a very nice idea to use the N word, a female version of that word, as they saw, to attack me. And
Wow.
that was the shock of a lifetime for me. I have been a visiting professor in Australia. I have taught in Brazil, university and all kinds of levels, binational centers. And I've been in Norway for almost 20 years, and that had never happened. And when I tell my Black friends in the United States, they tell me, oh, come on, Pollyanna, you married the whitest guy on the planet. You moved to Norway. All those white people, are you really surprised? And yes, I am, because it had never happened before. But here's the deal. I need you to give us some guidance at Selbu High School about the word, the origins of the word. And
Okay.
the first question is, tell us about the origins of the N word. Where does it come from, and how did it become a derogatory term?
Well, let's start with where it comes from. So, the N word is one that was used to really oppress persons of African descent in the United States. And this goes back to slavery, a time when many African slaves were taken, bought, and sold, and brought to the United States. We have many stories about that, the passage, and many African slaves dying, millions dying on ships and being brought over to the United States. And surprisingly enough, about 70% being brought to Brazil. However, I want to highlight the fact that upon slavery beginning in the United States, uh, persons of African descent were seen as less than, were seen as property, were actually defined in the law as property. So they were not considered people. If you think of this in context, if you compare, for example, if you look at your maybe kitchen table and you say, "Oh, well, that's a table," that's a table. There are some chairs there for us to sit down on, and yeah, that's just a table. Well, how do you treat a table? You treat a table as something that you use when you need it. It's for a purpose, and that's it. Well, think of it in terms of a person now, myself, that you're looking at, that you're speaking with as a table. And so that's very hard for people to conceptualize. But even worse, not as a table, but as something that you use for labor, something that you use as a weapon, as well as abuse daily. And so, if you can imagine being put to work every day, not being paid, being placed in the hot sun, the females of this particular minority population being treated as concubines, or even in worse terms, as ones who were just there to take care of someone else's kids, and not be compensated for it at any time, during the day, during the night, and just outright abused. This was the situation, and a lot worse, if you can imagine. And so when we think of the N word, this particular term was actually what was used to address any person of color, during this time. And it was mainly used as an oppressive term, an abusive term. The term itself, Nigger, is one that is definitely labeled and used as a derogatory term. If it were used in the United States, even in this current day, it would be seen and viewed as a derogatory term. It is literally a slur. It is a term in which, if you approached a person of color and called them this term, my goodness, you may encounter violence. It is that derogatory, here in the United States. Now, I will say this: during the time of slavery, leading up until a time when Black people, in particular, were freed in the United States, and what I mean by that is a law was actually passed, that declared that Black persons were no longer slaves. And really, what it said was slavery was no longer allowed in the United States. And so, and this is what led, of course, to the Civil War, the fighting between the northern states and southern states. Southern states embraced slavery, northern states did not, in particular. So you saw a lot of slaves who would try to escape slavery and run to northern states to be free, to be able to actually be, people, and provide a living for their families. Many persons did not survive this navigation. Oftentimes, people understand this, but it's referred to as the Underground Railroad. You can probably Google that and see what that's about. But it is a term that really digs into history, and it affects Black people in particular in a very, very hurtful way. It is one that is not taken lightly. The Now, I will say this: in terms of it navigating the times and going through the times of Jim Crow in the United States, which is a time period in which the Supreme Court legally authorized the treatment of Black people to be treated in an oppressive manner, meaning they allowed for segregation to exist within the United States in a legal form. What does that mean? That means that you had the courts that allowed for schools to be separated, meaning there were white schools and then there were Black schools. If there were restaurants that were only allowed for white persons to dine in. Black people had to do takeout, and pick up their meals from the kitchen. There were water fountains in parks that were for what they called colored people. And then there were white only water fountains. There were white only parks, Black only parks. So, and the problem with that, some people might go, oh, well, it doesn't sound that bad. But the problem with it was that the facilities were unequal, meaning the water fountain for, white people might be, wonderful water. It tastes like spring water. It's a great, very filtered. And then the colored water fountain doesn't work. or the schools, the white schools had desk chairs, up to date books, teachers were very well educated, but the black schools may not have even had a full roof or didn't even have desks. Children sat on the floor. They didn't have books for every black child. Maybe they had five, and they were outdated, and these children were learning outdated information, but they wanted to learn so badly that this is what was tolerated. Folks, this went on for 60 years. So if you can imagine being called the N word repeatedly every day, being referenced as that as common term every single day for hundreds of years, and then being told by your court of law, your highest court in the land, our Supreme Court, that it was okay to continue being oppressed legally, um, this is devastating. And that was for 60 years. That was from the 1890s on through the mid 1950s until Brown versus Board of Education was passed, which is the precedent case of desegregation. Okay, and so not until the 1950s did Black people really start to see a shift in United States society in terms of treatment. And so you had some growth from that point on, because still and still white people saw black people as inferior and as the N word, and still referenced black people as such. And so there was high tension, a lot of fighting, and hence where we ended up with the civil rights movement. So yes.
Thank you. This was perfect because our students here in Norway, when they study English, they also study the culture and the history of the United States and other English-speaking countries, which I think is amazing. But there is never enough time to cover everything since
Hmm.
there's so much. But here is what I want to pose a hypothetical to you.
Okay.
Let us just say this Norwegian teenager, ethnic Norwegian. He is in the United States and he
Hmm.
wants to talk to somebody. There's a group of African American teenagers and he uses
Hmm.
the N word to address them. What would possibly happen?
Well, teenagers, not adults, but teenagers, you'll probably get into a fight. You will probably, you, it's very probable that, yeah, you'll probably get into a fight. There will probably be no words exchanged other than probably profanity, and you will probably get into a fight. Um, I highly discourage you from doing such, because right now, even in the United States, tensions are very high in terms of race relations, social justice. There's been this emergence of police brutality within the United States. And so it has almost started a new civil rights movement, so to say. And so something like that um, would definitely cause probably some kind of violence.
The reason I'm asking you is that here in Norway, they have a lot of Norwegian programs on TV. There is a strong Norwegian culture, but there is also a lot of American influence. These
Hmm.
kids are listening to hip hop, they're listening to rap, and they are singing the lyrics, and then they hear the N word without the hard R, and they want to say
Hmm.
it. They want to
Hmm.
say it, they want to sing it. And for example, my daughter, she's half Brazilian, half Norwegian. And one day she asked me, this was a long time ago, she was watching something on YouTube, and she asked me, Mommy, so if I want to say the N word to someone who's also black like me, I can say it, right? And I told her, I would rather you didn't because you
Hmm.
don't look like you are
Hmm.
black, and the other person might feel extremely offended. They're not going to see
Hmm.
you as an equal. But then
Hmm.
talk about that for a minute. This the N word pass, as I've been hearing about.
Well, this is a thing. One thing that, and it's hard because you have individuals who are from the civil rights era, so they're the older population that experienced hardcore segregation, racism in the United States, and were offended daily by the N word. Okay, and then you have a generation who is probably between, we'll say, the 40 to maybe mid 50s age range right now, who grew up on hip hop lyrics that where the N word hard R was not used, but the N word with the A was used. And the reason for that is that folks tried to minimize the impact of the the mass oppressive technique of the word. So taking the word and trying to make it so that it's no longer oppressive, but one that's cool and we're referencing ourselves as something different than what white persons called us to minimize us in society. The issue with that is that, and I've always claimed this, and even ones who are practitioners of the field and persons who have a really loud voice, the Oprah Winfrey's, have really spoken out about the usage, even with the A, because the term externally, even while we as a people, and I'm talking about Black people, understand that it's not being used in the derogatory, oppressive manner. People who are outside or external to our culture, maybe the Black American culture as well as external to the United States, don't completely understand the difference, and as well can't conceptualize, well, why is it that it's okay for them to use it but not for us to use it? And and I will tell you clear and simply, the reason is yes, because you're white. And just to put it plain and simple, because of race relations within the United States and the fact that white people in particular, this wasn't a, oh, Black people, use the N word towards each other to tear each other down, or, before they gave us a beating, literally with a whip across our backs, and gave us lashes for discipline, across our backs. That was a sign, that somebody had been enslaved. You could look at their back and you could see the whelps, the healed, whelps on their back. And I'm talking about hundreds of them. It was a sign that you had been enslaved. And before you would get beaten, this would be the term that would be used, or go get that N word, or go get that N word, or where's that N word, or what, this is not a term that is to be used lightly. And so it is one that, yeah, it's not acceptable in any circumstances for a white person to use this term, because it was used by white people to literally oppress. This is where it came from. And so, no, it's not okay. And and I will say this as well, you know, Black Americans have to do a better job of not uh, making this word so lackadaisical, so to say, in our culture, in music, in videos, or even in movies or anything, because what it does is it puts out this narrative that it's okay
Yeah.
to persons who are not, of African descent. And that is essentially the problem. But to answer the question outright, no, it is not okay for a white person to use this term under any circumstances in any derivative. It is not okay. And if in the presence of a Black American, the term was used, it is a source that I just don't know what happened to you. I don't know, but I do know that it is almost certain that whether you would be harmed in some way physically, uh, it would most definitely be vocally. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is very important. And we could have talked about so many different things. And the reason why we're focusing on this and why the students from this point on, they will be exposed to some sort of education in the matter, because oftentimes it is out of ignorance and not out of being evil or even
Right,
being racist
right,
that
right.
somebody will say a thing like that. And is racism a crime in the United States, and what kind of punishment would someone receive in a situation of publicly saying racial slurs, or is there anything the legal system does in them? Because here in Norway and in Brazil, it is a crime.
Okay, so in the United States, this is where we have what we call in our First Amendment freedom of speech. So there are certain things that are illegal, such as you can't go and place a burning cross in the yard of a black family, or something like that, because that is seen as intimidation. It is seen as a hate crime. You can't go and purposely you know exert some kind of violence towards a minority group and think that that is okay, right? But you have what is called freedom of speech, and freedom of speech has its limitations. Using the N word towards somebody is technically not a crime in the United States. So you won't be arrested for it and charged for that. However, the actions that will follow uh, may cause for police intervention. And that's why it's one that like you have to be very careful with. In this day and age, right now in the United States, as I stated, tensions are so high in terms of race relations, social justice, because of the attacks that have occurred on Black people in particular in the United States by our law enforcement. Therefore, using such a slur would incur some kind of response that would probably uh, bear a need for police, uh, you know, interception, we'll say. And I think that it's just not worth it at the end of the day. It's just not worth it. But there to answer your question, there are repercussions for hate crimes in the United States. That is illegal, and even when hate crimes do occur, it actually goes to the federal level. So our FBI gets involved in those types of instances. But I will say that just using the slur is not one that will incur, criminal charges.
And now we're almost up for time, but I
It's
wanna
okay.
I wanna
I can allow for some more time. It's okay.
I
Okay.
wanna ask you about the work that you do and what is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People?
So the work that I do actually, and it just so happens that this particular organization is one that was created because of the inability for, in particular, Black persons to be able to exercise political involvement, voting, and experiencing economic downturn and things of that nature when it was created. And so it was created to allow for Black people to have a voice, uh, on the national stage, and to really organize an organization that would allow for that. It is metamorphed because of the mission, and so I want to be very clear. It's metamorphed into an organization that fights on behalf of any person of color. And when they say that, uh, they're talking about any minority population. Does not It does not mean a person who is Black. It can be a person of Hispanic descent, Asian descent, Indian descent. It does not matter, but it is an organization that fights any means of discrimination any means of discrimination, whether that be politically, economically, socially. It is meant to be an organization to uplift the rights of everyone and to make sure that everyone is treated fairly in society. So I currently lead one of the states in Georgia. I lead the operations side for the NAACP, as we call it, and it has been quite the ride. I will say this: Georgia, in particular, has been at the forefront in the United States for everything political right now because of the major turns that have occurred in Georgia. Some of the major court cases that have surrounded discrimination have come through Georgia. Some of the major instances, we have a case known as the Ahmaud Arbery case. That's one that has been very key. And just to give a brief, very brief synopsis of what occurred in this instance, you had a young black male in his 20s, very dark skin. He was a runner, avid runner, cross country, and he was running through his neighborhood, a neighboring neighborhood, and and there have been quite a few, we'll say, break-ins of just abandoned houses in that particular community. And so, because he was running through the community, there were some white local residents, white men, who decided to get in their truck and chase him in his truck, or in their truck while he was running through the community. And inevitably, they pulled out a shotgun and some other guns, and they murdered him in the middle of the street for running through a neighborhood. And the local police, the local district attorney, they all tried to cover it up to the point where the governor of Georgia had to step in and remove the case from their jurisdiction. This was a huge, huge incident because it was caught on tape. And, you know, that lets you know the amount of racial affliction in the United States and how oppressive the regular everyday actions are of white persons in the United States can be. And so because of this case, we were very influential in not only getting this case brought to justice, but we also were at the forefront of making sure that that local district attorney was voted out of office. So they are no longer the district attorney there in that area. But I will say that this was very key. You can also point towards some of these other cases that have, come on the scene, black men being, held on the ground by a police officer's foot on their neck, killing them, holding them down for 9 minutes, 9 minutes, unable to breathe, literally murdering somebody in the middle of the street. And so these instances, because of the N word, because of the very foundation of it, because, Black people are seen as inferior, or that they have, no purpose here, or, this is a white man's country, and things of this nature. However, this country inevitably founded by persons of color, and built literally on the backs, by the hands of persons of color. And that history is oftentimes negated. And unfortunately, words like the N word are ones that represent that very time and the current time of oppressing Black people.
I am so honored that I'm starting to cry. I hadn't seen you in 20 something years.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so this is a very special moment for me to have you on this video conference. I want to thank you so much.
absolutely.
It is going to be so incredibly helpful, not only for me, for my sake, to make a safer environment for me to come in where people will know what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, how to address someone. And it was so amazing everything that you talked about, it will be very important for them to hear from a real person and not just read it from a book or
Right.
see or watch a movie about it. So I feel like this was amazing. Thank you so much for this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I will say this as one who is a practitioner in the field, doing this work, as one who has done some international consulting work with diversity and equity and inclusion, as one who stands in the classroom every semester and teaches on civil liberties, civil rights, the history of all of this, and being able to teach it not only to persons who are black, but individuals who are white, individuals who are Hispanic of Hispanic descent, individuals who are of Asian descent, and everybody from all walks of life. And I think what is important is to really be able to state it exactly like it is. I think people respect the real version of what things are, and it stops a level of interpretation from occurring. I'm always very blunt about what is meant and what is not meant. And I think that persons respect that. But I also think there's a level of sincerity and also sensitivity to, understand as one who has been an educator that, people simply do not understand sometimes. So there is a level of ignorance in play. And I think that understanding that, there's a certain direction of teaching that I've been able to do. But I also understand that there are individuals who purposely approach this subject with a underlying motivation to harm persons of color. And so in that instance, I want to be very, very clear that in no situation within the United States, external to the United States, is it ever okay to use the N word, and especially not towards someone of African descent.
Thank you so much. And I hope that I will let you know how it goes with
Please
the
do, please
teachers, with the
do.
students, and this was really, really great.